Okay, I was told to make sure that the Zoom camera is in the right place, so let me do that because evidently my head was cut off and it was all camera or all clock last week. So let me see, I have to be back here. I don't know. Okay, hey Zoom folks, and hello y'all. I am glad to be here again, and I don't know how to get my head because it's just this part of my head. So. To this part.
We can see all of you.
Can you see all of me? Okay, because on the camera it just shows up, you just see my chin. So, okay, as long as you can see all of me, I'm gold. Okay, I don't want to get any more family complaints. All right, so I am Laura, I'm an alcoholic. I'm glad to be here. My sobriety date is February 23rd, 2013. I have a sponsor and I sponsor women and my sponsees sponsor women. So I'm in the middle of the program and I am grateful for that. I would like to start this with a prayer just to get us all in an attitude. So God, today, help me set aside everything I think I know about you, everything I think I know about myself, everything I think I know about others, everything I think I know about my own recovery, so that I may have an open mind, a new experience with all these things. Amen. Amen. So let's have a quick recap of, we're in step 3 today. And recap of where we are and how we got here. So we've covered step 1 and step 2. So we admitted we were powerless over alcohol and our lives had become unmanageable. And so step 1, I was powerless over alcohol and my life was unmanageable. My outsides looked okay, but my insides were pretty much shredded after 25 years of binge drinking. I had a pretty turbulent upbringing, and I was met with early professional success, and then I started drinking, binge drinking for 25 years, and I hid my drinking and I lied about my drinking, and I had a lot of fun drinking with my binge drinking, but it started to cause a little bit of problems. I lied about it in expense reports, and I lied about it to family, and as it got more and more progressive and longer in my, as I got older, it started to cause problems because I would be irritable, restless, and discontent, basically, if I couldn't drink the way I wanted to, when I wanted to, and where I wanted to. And so it started to cause problems because I would, lie to get out of the house, or arrange things so that I could drink when I wanted to and where I wanted to. And I started to arrange my business around who I could drink with and where I could drink with. So at 50, I heard I had a lot of God. I had talked about I had a lot of God ways and a lot of grace in my life, and God had kind of hit me over the head and told me certain things. And at 50, I got a clear message that I was drinking myself to death, and I wasn't going to make it to 55. And so I knew I needed to do something about my drinking. And so at 50, I really started in earnest to stop drinking. And my drinking really escalated at that point, and I could not stop drinking. And it really became unmanageable at that point. And so my interior really became a dumpster fire. And so at that point, in February 23, I had a night where I just could not control my drinking. I had a business problem that I drank at. And so the stars collided where I really was hit bottom emotionally, and my drinking really became out of control. And I made a call to my brother and asked for help, and he got me to an AA meeting the next day. I heard what I needed to hear, and I heard hope at that AA meeting, which led me to step 2, where I came to believe that a power greater than myself could restore me to sanity, because I heard what I needed to hear at that AA meeting, and that was hope. And so I believe the power was in that AA meeting. And so they sent me from there to read Bill's story and the doctor's opinion. And so I went home and I read the doctor's opinion, and in that I learned that I was physically different than other normies that could drink, and I processed alcohol differently, and that I was allergic to alcohol. And so what that made me understand was that as long as alcohol didn't go in my system, I wasn't going to start the cycle of craving and drinking. And so that was kind of an aha moment that I just needed to let it kind of burn off my system, and then I wasn't going to have the cravings and need it anymore. So that gave me some hope, more hope. And then also in that doctor's opinion, it talked about something needing to have some sort of moral psychology or religious. And I knew in my past that I had had that religious experience. I just didn't know how I was going to get back to that. So then I read Bill's story, and I do owe I spoke about Bill being a Navy guy, and I owe the guys an apology that are Navy people, because he really was an Army guy and he was the Virginia National Guard. So I apologize for that mistake. So my apologies. Nerves, when you're up here, come on. So anyway, that's my fault, so I'll own up to that. So, and I think I probably said it 74 times. So, once you get in your head, it's in your head. So, I apologize. But anyway, so I identified with that, and I talked about that, how I had identified with that. And then, so when he was in that reading, he did say that I could find a God of my own understanding. And so when I was reading that, it all of a sudden solved my God problem, because I didn't have to have a church that associated. It was just a one-on-one personal relationship with God of my understanding. And it didn't have to be the Methodist church. It didn't have to be any of the churches that I had attended and that I had had some conflagrations with, because they always had requirements of me. And so I could put all of that aside and just have that one-on-one relationship. And so I was in a place then that I could actually rely on a power greater than myself to restore me to sanity. And I didn't really know what that was. But so I am there at that point. And so I had gone to, I'm still in New Smyrna Beach, out of town. I had gone to an AA meeting in Jacksonville, come back to Jacksonville, gone to a couple of meetings there, came to a couple of AA meetings, home group in Jacksonville. Monday, as I was leaving on a business trip for 6 weeks. And so I knew that I needed to get a solid footing because I was leaving on a 6-week business trip, all expenses. And I needed to get a solid footing in AA, or I wasn't going to come back. And that was another one of those God instincts that I knew that if I didn't get a handle on my drinking, that there was going to be a problem on this 6-week long trip. So I took the reprieve that I had with AA very seriously. And so I had found a sponsor once I got back to Jacksonville on Monday, and I was leaving on Wednesday afternoon. So I met with this new sponsor person. Her name was Claire. And we met on Monday, we met again on Tuesday, and we met again on Wednesday. And we went to meetings, 3 meetings a day. And so on Wednesday morning, we went to a 7 a.m. meeting, we went to an 8 a.m. meeting, and then there was a 10 a.m. meeting in San Marco. And after that 10 a.m. meeting, we sat down and we talked about all that we had done with step 1, all that we had done in step 2, all that I understood about what I had read in the doctor's opinion and all that I had read in Bill's story and everything. And then we went through the 3rd step and what I thought about the 3rd step. And then we actually went through, kind of what the next steps were. And so I was actually clearly convinced of the big book ABCs that I was an alcoholic and I couldn't manage my life. No human power could. I certainly had tried, right? And that only God could if I would seek him. And so we went through the big book prayers on page 63, word by word. And God, did I believe in God? Yes, I did. And did I have a personal relationship with him? Yes, I did. I could tangibly describe who he was, what he meant to me. So I offer myself to thee. Did I understand what that meant? And what did that look like? And, a lot of times we can spend weeks, months going through that. What does that kind of sacrifice look like? I just didn't have the time to do that, because I was getting on an airplane to Las Vegas. So she needed to make sure that I understood in big animal pictures, that I knew what I was actually getting myself into. To build with me and do with me as thou wilt. So did I understand I was asking him to rebuild me physically and internally, spiritually. And did I realize that I was emotionally destroyed? And so I had come to her and said, I'm a dumpster fire. So I was telling her already, I'm ready for this dumpster fire to be put out. I need rebuilding. And so we were agreed on that I was ready to make that prayer and I was ready for rebuilding. Relieve me of the bondage of self, that I may better do thy will. So we did talk about, and I had never heard, self-will run riot, I'm driving the bus. I had never heard those terms, but as soon as she explained those terms to me, and she explained those, they were such aha moments. And, Scooby-Doo driving the van was kind of what and so like Scooby-Doo, and, and so it was like off I went, right? And so in my mind, anytime it was like Scooby-Doo. And so it was like anytime I just had to bring that visual, whenever I was, off on my own tangent, it was like, oh, Scooby-Doo, here we go again. And, because they always got themselves into a ditch. They never ended up in Nordstrom's, it was always in the ditch. And so, some dark cave with a flashlight going, I'm scared. So, that's where they ended, they were on their own. So it's like, I did not want that. So it was like, okay. So relieve me of the bondage of self, that I may better do thy will. And I did always want to do God's will, even when I was little, I always wanted to do God's will. And I just didn't realize that I had gotten so far asunder. So I really said, yes, God, let me do your will. I always knew from a little tyke that I was always wanted to be here for his will and his good. And I was ready to be back on that path. And so I was, yes, let's do that. Take away my difficulties, that victory over them may bear witness to those that I would of thy power, thy love, and thy way of life. And I was so ready to do that. I just was so happy to be able to get over, the difficulties and the struggles that I had. And I was so ready to be able to say, yes, I'm happy to do. I had already done that in Youth for Christ and said, when I worked in Youth for Christ, I came out of this horrific childhood. You can too. So I had already done that, and so I was really willing to be able to do that again. So, once we understood that and had gone through the prayer to that level of detail, we sat down on our knees and held hands in the corner of the San Marco Club and prayed that prayer. And I was so relieved when I had finally prayed that prayer and made that decision that this is the way we're going to go from now on. And I had really committed to this way of life, and that I wasn't half in and half out and maybe not, that I had bought in, and that this was the new way. And I had a new employer, and I was really bought in, and I had done the things that I needed to do to make this work. And so Claire sent me on the way, and she goes, okay, you've done everything you need to do to make this work. You have made a decision. You've made a commitment. You know who your higher power is. You are ready to go. And so I want you to go with confidence that you have every reason to stay sober while you're in Las Vegas. You just have to consistently remember that you made a decision to follow your higher power. and you should be able to make this journey go with God. And so she gave me this little tiny index card. Claire, if you remember her, she was a really simple person. And she was no fuss, no muss. And so she gave me a white index card with blue ink, and it had 4 or 5 instructions on it, 1 dot. And it was like, pray, 2 dot, read your big book, 3 dot, get to a meeting every day, and then 4 dot, spiritually fit. And that was it. And so my first big hurdle was going to be not to drink on the airplane. And that was, going to be the first time I hadn't done that in probably 30 years. And so she goes, what's your plan? And so, we talked through what my plan was going to be. And it was to go, get through security and then get a really yummy Starbucks and walk on the plane with a Starbucks. And, I would never have thought to do that. It would have been my way of doing it, would have been the cart rolls by, no. That would have been my plan, right? And so somebody who had experience said, no, there's a better way. Get something that you really like to drink, have it in your hand, have a better way. So that's what I did. And every time I flew on that whole 6-week journey, I didn't do the no. I had a Starbucks in my hand. And so I developed a crack habit for Starbucks. It became a line item in my bill. And I needed bigger pants, but it was okay. But it was, those were small decisions that I led. I kept making these decisions that I was going to do things differently, and I was going to turn my will over to a higher power. And so these are all these little decisions. So I had, she says, when I left for, in St. Nick's, Michael Shorstein had these laminated prayer cards. I don't know if anybody here has them, but they have On Awakening on one page, and then on the back they have your nightly review. So I am, 4 days sober, and I've got these with me on my trip to Las Vegas. And so she says, put this on your nightstand, and then put your phone charger, and then put your phone under your bed. So in the morning, you have to get on your knees to get your phone, and while you're down there, say your prayers. Because you're on your knees and you're saying your prayers, and you've got your prayer card right here. So that was a great way for me to start, because I got on my knees every morning, said my prayers before I even really looked at my phone. And so, that was a great way for me to start 6 weeks of a habit. And, once you're doing that for 6 weeks, it becomes a way of life. And I have sponsees and grand sponsees here, and they all nodded, because that's exactly what I taught them to do, and they're doing that. They do that as well. So I will say, that first morning I get to the convention, I'm a control freak, and I had 15 clients at this convention, and I have their time scheduled down to the hour. So I know who they're eating breakfast with. This one's eating breakfast with the scientist. This one's eating breakfast with an app developer. This one's eating breakfast in the lab. This one's eating breakfast with this person. This one's eating lunch with this one. This one's eating this. And then they're going on the floor, and I'm eating this one at 10, this one at 2, this one at 4. And so it's a myriad of details. And I have 6 weeks of that, basically. And I am a control freak. And I don't have my usually I could have a drink to calm things down, or, and nobody knows what's in my coffee, because that's, and so I don't have any of that. And so I needed a meeting to get my nerves calmed down. So I get my where and when, and I find a 6:30 meeting, and I roll into my first meeting in Las Vegas, and it is I got my little Brooks Brothers suit on, hair done, and it's a men's smoking meeting. And, that's my proficiency is at reading the where and when. So, but they were really, really happy to have me, because, they had a brand new, newbie, sober person. And so they sat me down and they were listening to Joe and Charlie. And so I'd never heard of Joe and Charlie. And so we listened to Joe and Charlie, and I think it was they were on the third step or maybe the fourth step. And so they put the Joe and Charlie tapes on my phone, and they got the where and when for Vegas and showed me a great meeting for me to go to, one at 7 o'clock in the morning, one at noon, and then one at 7 at night. So they showed me great meetings to go through. And then it was a $40 cab ride for me to get to that meeting. And, because now I'm an honesty program, I can't expense it. So, with my new way of life. So I was like, oh God. So they said, how much do you have here? You can't expense it, it's personal expense. So they're reminding me what my sponsor tells me. So they get me in their car. And we Thelma and Louise back to my hotel, and we had so much fun on that ride back. It was really, really great. And so they dropped me off, and I never saw those guys again. But I went to those meetings, that 7 o'clock meeting, and I ended up picking chips up there because I went to that conference, for 8 years, and I ended up picking my chips there for a long time until I retired. But so I get back and I go to the conference, and before I had gotten sober, this is just God, how God works. It's just remarkable. I was in a leadership program with IBM, and I went on Thursdays and Tuesdays. So on Tuesday I went, and I had told the mentor, we were working on the not controlling and releasing control, because they're getting me ready to manage people. And so you have to let things go. You have to let people do things. You can't micromanage people. And so I was kind of a control freak, and it was hard for me, to let things go. And so I got on the phone on Tuesday, and she could tell my voice was a little different. And so I had told her that I had stopped drinking. And I just told her just personal reasons. I didn't tell her, but I told her that I had stopped drinking for personal reasons. And she said, and I said I was going to AA, and she goes, oh, I've been sober for 15 years. And so I was like, oh God, I said, you're gonna help me give me any tips on going to this, this conference. And she goes, yes, I can. And so she goes, you're gonna have to relax. And she says, don't try and control anything. And she goes, turn it over to God. And these are like, she's talking, I have no idea what she means, And she says, I want you just to practice these things. And she says, just try. And so she goes, when you're on the conference, on the convention floor, she says, you've got these clients with scientists, and you have these, clients with, people that are in the labs. And she says, you've arranged the meetings. Just let God do what God's going to do. And don't say anything. Just see what happens. And usually I'm trying to direct the conversation because I know what's going on at the client's office. I'm trying to ask leading questions. And so it took everything in my power to not say anything, And so she said, well, she says, do you wear any jewelry? Because we haven't met, she's on the phone. She goes, do you wear any jewelry? And I said, well, yeah, I have a wedding ring and I have a family ring. And she goes, well, since alcoholism is a family disease, why don't you use your family ring? And because this is a miniature of my dad's wedding ring. And she goes, why don't you turn that when you feel like you need to get involved? And you'll use that as turning it over. So I'm sitting in this convention and I'm turning this ring like a fanatic. And I have a callus on the back of my finger from turning this ring. And so I'm just sitting in this, I'm just looking. And so what ended up happening was I didn't say anything, I didn't interject anything, and these conversations went so differently than I had anticipated. And they just turned corners and went in valleys and over mountains and around hills that I just didn't expect. And the customers are like, we need to go bigger. We need more. And I'm like, what? And so I'm like, okay. And they're like, we need to redo this because we're gonna need to redo our budget. We're gonna need it more, you know? And so I'm like going back to the room and redoing quotes and redoing things. And those are problems I like to have. And so, and you know, it's like, we need this before the 4 o'clock meeting. I need to have this reswizzled. So it's like, okay. So, you know, it was 6 days of that. And I just had to turn things over and get out of my way. And so when I'm seeing results like that, I'm like, okay, I get it. And so then I'm taking, you know, so at day 1, I had all of them at this big dinner table. And, you know, they're expecting me to be fun, loud Laura at dinner. And I'm not drinking. And so the wine, they know that I love wine and I'm gonna buy a big, nice bottle of wine and keep them coming. And I'm not. And so the wine list comes to me and they hand it to me and I just knew intuitively if I opened that wine list, it was gonna be a problem. And so I just kept it closed and I kept handing it to my customers saying, no, it's a gift, kind of like, you choose. You know, you choose. And they kept pushing it back to me. And then finally the wine steward just appeared and he goes, would you like some help? And I said, yeah, just choose something under $300 and surprise us. And so he did. So I never had to open it up. They got a treat and I never had to look at it. And I just knew that if I had opened it up, I knew that we were gonna get into Stupid-Dooville and it would have been, you know, a problem. And I knew I was in trouble. And because I knew I would have been tempted. And because I would have seen my old friends calling. And I just knew. So, you know, there again, God showed up when I knew. I just turned it over and I just said, I can't handle this, God, you're gonna have to do something. And so he sent the wine steward at the right time. And I am so grateful for that. So I am sitting there and I am in, that conference ends, I end up going the next week on my wine cruise with my friends. And so, you know, I told my clients why I wasn't drinking because I'd given up drinking for Lent. So, you know, they really can't argue with that, you know? So then I go to my wine cruise and I tell them that I have antibiotics. I caught something in New York and now I'm on antibiotics and I can't drink because they can't argue with that. So, you know, because I really wasn't ready to tell the whole AA story just because I didn't have it down. So I'm telling, these are the reasons that I'm telling why I'm not drinking. And so, you know, while they're doing these 17 flight drink dinners, right, I would just have, you know, Pellegrino and, you know, during the dessert course, I'd leave and I would just go put Joe and Charlie in and walk the decks, you know. And I was so happy with that. It wasn't like I felt left out or, but, you know, had I not gone to that first AA meeting and gotten Joe and Charlie, I wouldn't have had that companionship and that ability to just have something to do during all those hours of the wine, you know. And then there were AA meetings on the cruise ship. And so I could go, and there was one guy, and he had his family reunion, and he was the only guy there. And so I went the first time, and this is, you know, just a rookie mistake, right? And so I went, he's kind of an old, kind of weird guy. And so I went the first time, and he's been sober for like 30 years. And so I never went back, you know, because there was only one guy there. So to me, it was like one guy, no meeting. And so I got back to Claire and told her about the meeting. And I just said, yeah, it was just one other guy, it really wasn't a meeting. And, you know, he had his family. And she shamed me. It was awful. She goes, he probably needed you more than you needed him. And I felt this big, but it was such a lesson, and I've never forgotten that. If I ever meet just one AA person, I'm gonna stick to him like a snap, just because I didn't know, and so I had seen him around the boat and I waved to him and that was it. But, he never made an effort like, come over here, I need to talk to you or anything. But, I just didn't know. But it was, and so now whenever I go on a cruise, and I do cruise a lot, I'll just sit in the room, even if there's nobody there, in case somebody does come by, I'll just sit there. But that was, a rookie mistake. I didn't know. But and then in New York, I went, so here I'm 3 weeks sober. I went to the Mustard Seed, and I don't know if any of you guys have ever been to the Mustard Seed. So I'm in there, and they ask, is there anybody from out of town? Yes, Jacksonville. Is everybody newly sober? Yes, 3 weeks. And so oh, good, you're gonna run the meeting. And so I croak out, my story. And, what I didn't realize in that 20 minutes is how God had really, really changed my life in that 3 weeks, and how he had just those repetitive decisions for me to say yes, 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 yes. How he had changed my life in those 3 weeks. And in the retelling of that, in that Mustard Seed meeting, it was so confirming and affirming to me to be able to say, this is working, this is worth it, this is amazing. And now, had I been restored, was I some blossoming daffodil? No, I was still the same dumpster fire inside. I just wasn't drinking. But it was worth it to me to wake up every morning not hungover and still doing it again every day. Because I would wake up in the morning, one eye, not hungover. Yay! That was my prayer of gratitude every morning. I was so grateful not to be hungover. And I could start the day in gratitude just by not being hungover. That's all I needed. I didn't need any other passion prizes. I just needed not to be hungover. I could start the day that way. And I could start turning my ring and turning over. Do I want to have a Bloody Mary this morning? No. So I could make all of those decisions to change my life and to change my decision patterns just because I wasn't hungover that morning, And so those were the little decision trees and the decision patterns I was making every day, just based, was I going to get on my knees? Was I going to put my phone under the bed? Was I going to say my prayers in the morning? All based on I wasn't hungover in the morning. And so those were just the tiny little things that I needed. So then the next morning, I go to the Mustard Seed, and Mike Shorstein is in that meeting. And the weird thing, when you're that newly sober, to be out of town and to see somebody when you're newly sober, it was just bananas, it was so exciting to see somebody that I knew. I was just like, it was just crazy, it was like, and it was very, very exciting to see that. It was very exciting. So on the 12 and 12, my sponsor, I see her, hey, Vicki. On page, I wanted to share with you on page 40 about the willingness. Where are we? Hang on. I should have put a bookmark in here, right? That's my Girl Scout would have told me to do that, right? So when he acquires willingness, he is the only one that can make the decision to exert himself. Trying to do this is an act of his own will. All of the 12 steps require sustained and personal exertion to conform to their principles, and so we trust into God's will. It is when we try to make our will conform with God's that we do this rightly. To all of us, this is a most wonderful revelation. Our whole trouble had been the misuse of willpower. We had tried to bombard our problems with it instead of attempting to bring it into agreement with God's intention for us. To make this increasingly possible is the purpose of AA's 12 steps, and step 3 opens the door. Once we've come into agreement with these ideas, it is really easy to begin the practice of step 3. In all times of emotional disturbance or indecision, we can pause, ask for quiet, and in the stillness simply say, God, grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change, the courage to change the things I can, the wisdom to know the difference. Thy will, not mine, be done. And so, as I prayed that prayer through those 6 weeks, I prayed that anytime I felt, I was turning my ring, or if I felt that I was getting, that was one of the first prayers I memorized. And so when I felt that I was in a squeegee situation, or I was really in a situation of turmoil that I couldn't get myself out of, or I felt that I was in conflict with somebody, or I'd gone, out of something and I just couldn't get out of it, and I, really felt like I need a drink, or I want to act out, or I'm going to send an email and tell them, I would literally pray that prayer, and I would pray it sometimes 9 times in a row. And so it was teaching me to pause, and it was also teaching me that I still had character defects and things that I needed to work out. And I did have anger issues, and I did have personality issues, and I did have things that I needed, to talk to my sponsor about frequently. And, fortunately, the phone call, except when I was in Amsterdam because we had time zone issues, but she was available, and so there were a lot of times that she would repeat the words, Laura, you're in fear, or this is, you're jealous, or Laura, so there started to be kind of themes, that she would talk to me about. And so I, because I wasn't using booze as a solution, I was using prayer, I was turning things over, it started to be kind of obvious that I was having to use, or I needed to do some other things to get my character to change, instead of just kind of glowing along the way I had been. So I think we'll talk about that in step 4 next week. But there is in the book, big book, on page 63, there's 7 promises that she did point out to me before I left. And it's on page 63, and it says that we'll become less interested in ourselves, we'll become interested in what we can contribute, we'll enjoy peace of mind, we'll face life successfully, we'll become conscious of his presence, we'll lose fear of today, and we'll be reborn. Now, I didn't have all of the promises at that point, but she told me to look at these on page 63, and she goes, see where you can find these as objectives for today. She says, if you can find those as objectives for today as you go through your day, she goes, and you find that at the end of the day, you were successful in those, she says, that's a win for the day. She goes, hopefully as you get sober and you're further along in your sober career, you'll see those, and those will be promises for your life. She says, but if you can, as you're walking through your newly sober day, if you can get 2 of those, if you can get 1 or 2 of those, you're having a good day. So she says, just keep an eye on those 7 promises and just see what those you can accomplish. And so with that, I will talk to you all about step 4 next week. And